everybody and welcome back to the channel. It's TheSketchMonkey here. Now let me ask you a question. Have you heard of the Indian sports car brand DC, and particularly their car Avanti? My guess is probably not, and you might be better off for it. So this car was suggested to me by one of my Instagram followers to have a look at and redesign, and I've actually seen this car before. And it is a lot that needs to be done with this car. A little background on this car: it's priced between $45,000 to $55,000. It's powered by a 2-liter Renault EcoBoost V6 producing 265 horsepower. This power source allowed the DC Avanti to sprint from 0 to 62 or 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, 0 to 62 miles per hour in a not so blistering 6.9 seconds. It may look like it's about to take off to space, but don't worry, this DC Avanti isn't going anywhere fast. The DC Avanti has been discontinued. It was on sale a couple of years ago, and in this video I want to explore the idea of having the DC Avanti come back as a 2020 model and keep the original styling of it, but fix the major problems that there are a few of, and create something that could compete with the Italians and Germans. Maybe not in performance, but hey, style is just as important. So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to show you the problems that we have in front, and then in the rear, and of course the most important view, which is the side view, because that gives you an overall view of the proportions and the styling of the car. So with that said, wish me luck, and let's jump into Photoshop and see what can be done with this DC Avanti. Alright, so let's get started here and start with the 3/4 front view, which is the best view of this car, believe it or not. The problem here is, I'm gonna let you guess, take a minute to guess what the biggest problem is here with this car. We've talked about it before in several videos, and I'm sure you're going to recognize what the main issue with the DC Avanti is. Take a guess. That's right, line flow. The problem with the DC Avanti here is it feels like it's part melted cheese design and part sharp defined lines. It's like part of the car were protected and didn't melt, while the rest of the car was completely exposed and just started to droop and create these weird lines that we have here. On top of that, we have this really deep crease that goes along the side of the body here, almost like someone took a razor blade and just cut this side of the car, because it has different thickness to it. So it's the thickest here, and then it gets thinner as you go back here, and then it gets thick again here, until it finally disappears over the fender. That doesn't really follow any line of the fender either. It just goes straight here, which is interesting. So what I would do is to decide, do I want to have a sort of 90s melted cheese style for this car, or do I want to go and define it even further with some sharp lines? Well, first of all, when we look at this later on in the side view, we're gonna see the big problem with the proportions of the car, and that's the view that we're going to be focusing on the redesign later on in the video, and try to do our best to fix that while keeping the original intent of the designer styling wise, but we need to fix the proportions and obviously the line flow of this car. So just looking at the hood here, it kind of reminds me of a Ferrari 458. Not bad, but we have the instead of having sharp angles here and sharp fenders, we have this undefined lines that goes across here that are not sharp and they're not soft either. They kind of a mix in between, and then that clashes with the design of the headlights that are super sharp, and also this line right here that goes in and down to the grille and creates this inverted mouth that we have here, which is pretty standard for sports cars and supercars today, this front end. But I have a feeling that all these graphical elements, they don't play well together, and that's obviously going to be fixed. So now let's move on to the rear view, rear 3/4 view of this car, and this is where it gets really interesting. So we have this deep cut in the side of the car here, and it goes on top here, and then it stretches all the way back here. And again, when we look at this in side view, we're going to see just how far this rear overhang is from the rear axle of the car. It stretches out and it feels like it's about to fall off the car because it's sagging so much. This line right here, it dips and then it goes back up. And if we continue this line all the way across the car, it's like a roller coaster. We have a top here and then it dips here. Then we have a slight curvature here and then dips and up again, dip and then back up at the rear. And of course it does the exact same thing on the other side of the car. But let's go in and look at the details on this car. One detail I'm gonna focus on that kind of sums up this design here is this detail down here. You can see that there's this red reflector or whatever it's called down here, and look how this is inserted in the bumper of the car. You have a rectangular graphical element here, and that is inserted in this dip in the bumper. It just doesn't fit graphically, and it looks like two completely different parts from two completely different cars were put together into one. This is just a tiny detail, but as it was with the Finier Supersport as well, these tiny details, when they occur all over the cars, not only in detail but also in the big picture of the car, it creates a big problem. And specifically, if you have all these problems, graphical problems, and on top of that you have a proportion problem, which we're going to look at next. All right, so here we go. The most important view when looking at a car and decide, and checking out the proportions and the overall design of it, is of course the side view. What we have here is of course the DC Avanti in side view, and just look at how much the rear end just falls off the car. It feels like it's about to just go down and hit the floor here. So what we need to do is we need to have something that builds it up in the bottom, and we need to have some lines here that goes like this to hold up the rear end, especially when you have this deep dip here that graphically makes it look like it's the gravity at this point is a lot higher than it is on the rest of the car here. And also, as I said before in the beginning, we need some line flow here. There isn't a lot of connections between this part right here and this part and this part. So what we need to do is create at least one line that goes from the front all the way back and then probably wraps around something like this in the rear. And this air intake is one of these lines that I just don't understand, because we have a lot of sharpness here. This is basically a triangle here, and then they decided to go with some smooth lines here that are very irregular. You can see the width of this line is all over the place, and that goes into the rear lights right here, but it keeps a flow, a nice flowing motion all across the car, and that is broken up by this air intake here that just fades out into the body right there. And then we have another air intake up here that at the same time is not very defined. So what I want to do is work on this air intake here and have the same angle here as this top air intake, because I like this angle of this air intake here, and I want to have that same angle on the lower air intake as well, so we have some sort of connection between the top part of the car and the lower part of the car. And on top of that, the lines from these air intakes here are going to somehow connect with the rear and the front, so that we have some sort of continuity all around the car. So with that said, a lot of doodles on this car. There's a lot to do, so let's jump in. Again, we're using Photoshop for this, and let's see how this DC Avanti redesign is going to turn out. that's about it for this redesign of the DC Avanti. As I said before, I want to keep some of the, or as much as possible, of the original idea of the designers and try to work it out to make it more like a unified design. Pretty much what we did with the Veneer Hypersport or Supersport a couple of videos back. And most of the time, it really doesn't require a lot of big changes, especially not to the graphical parts. And I think this is an example of how important proportions are for a car. If we just change the rear a little bit and as I said, work on the lines here, we come up with a pretty cool looking mid-engine car that, in my opinion, looks a lot more grown up than the original version of the DC Avanti. Let me know if you agree with that, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you are new and enjoy car content like this. I'm TheSketchMonkey. Thanks for staying until the end of the video. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.